1979, the point of no return. Millions celebrated a revolution that was already turning against them. March 19, 1979. The newspaper Kayhan published the first evidence. The location, Rudsar, a city near the Caspian Sea. Evidence number 1, a mother of 3 and a man she traveled with. Revolutionary officers intercepted them. They stood before a judge. The court defined the charge as an illegitimate relationship. The sentence followed immediately. 50 lashes for the woman, 100 for the man. Under the Iranian Penal Code, this is a had punishment, a penalty fixed by Sharia law. The execution moved to the street. A crowd gathered in the square. Imagine a trial for a criminal. Then see the reality. A mother of 3 stands in the center of a public road. The newspaper page appeared. The text of the verdict followed. Then, the physical action began. The lash hit the air. The sound of the strike echoed across the open square. No shouting, only the mechanical rhythm of the leather hitting skin. 50 times. This was not a local anomaly. While women in Tehran marched against the new hijab decree, another square was being prepared in Isfahan. 3 people stood there, 2 men and 1 woman. The accusation, an affair with a corrupt person. Ayatollah Khomeini, a revolutionary judge, issued the order. 100 lashes for each. They were flogged in full public view. After the final strike, the 3 were forced to repent on the spot. The procedure ended. The crowd remained. The verdict in Rudsar was no act of vigilantism. It was the output of a new state machinery. 11 days after the hijab decree, the legal landscape of Iran fractured. Revolutionary courts and Islamic committees materialized in every district. Who gave these judges their power? The mandate was total. Enforce morality without legal limits. These structures operated parallel to the old justice system. Soon, they replaced it entirely. There was no oversight, no right to appeal. The mechanics were simple. Committees patrolled, courts sentenced. Revolutionary judges redefined crime in weeks. Relations outside marriage, mixed gatherings, or visible hair now led to the prisoner's dock. Punishment followed the logic of the Sharia. The new authorities focused their strikes on women first. The judges moved from the bench to the town squares to oversee the lash. A wooden post in the center of a public square. The victim's hands are bound. The whip cracks against skin. These were not hidden executions. The new regime moved the violence of the courtroom into the open air of late 1979. They didn't just want obedience, they wanted public repentance. Why did they choose the streets? To turn every bystander into a witness or a target. The committees of the Islamic Revolution, known as the Committee, took control of the pavement. These patrols eventually formed the backbone of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They wore armbands, they carried wide authority. They moved through neighborhoods like a slow-moving net. A young couple sits in a darkened cinema. They are inches apart. A committee member spots them. The patrol moves in. They check documents. They demand proof of marriage. If there is no paper, there is no mercy. A slap to the face, a kick to the ribs, detention on the spot. By 1980, the committee patrolled every intersection. They hunted for Western influence, the scent of alcohol, or a hand held in public. The regime scaled the terror. Individual sentences from the Rudsar courts became a template for the entire nation. Public flogging became a routine sight in city parks. Crowds gathered to watch the lash, turning private lives into state property. At this moment, the Iranian constitution was not even finalized. The street patrols of 1980 did not appear from a vacuum. They relied on a single document signed nearly a year earlier. This was the blueprint for total visibility. March 7, 1979. One day before International Women's Day, the timing was deliberate. Ayatollah Khomeini issued a direct command from the holy city of Qom. He targeted government offices first. Every female employee had to wear the Islamic hijab. Was this a suggestion or a legal recommendation? It was a mandate from the highest authority in the state. Khomeini framed uncovered hair as nakedness. He labeled it immoral. The shock hit the capital instantly. Civil servants arrived at their desks to find guards at the doors. Women without head coverings were turned away. Security forced them to leave the premises immediately. Many had supported the revolution, believing religious dress would remain a personal choice. By the afternoon of March 7th, that choice vanished. The regime transformed a piece of clothing into a requirement for state service. The order from March 7th triggered an immediate explosion. By the next morning, the streets of Tehran were no longer silent. March 8, 1979, International Women's Day. What was supposed to be a celebration turned into a front line. Thousands of women stepped out of their homes without headscarves. This was a direct, physical rejection of the new decree. The composition of the crowd defied simple labels. University students marched alongside seasoned professionals. Mothers held the hands of their daughters. Secular women stood next to those who were deeply religious but refused state-coerced modesty. They shared a single realization. The revolution they fought for was being weaponized against them. The regime responded with steel. Pro-Khomeini militiamen and revolutionary guards moved in. They formed tight circles around the demonstrators. Men shouted threats. They lunged at the crowds to provoke a retreat. The air grew heavy with the smell of ozone and burnt powder. A militiaman raised his rifle. He pulled the trigger. Sharp cracks echoed off the stone buildings as they fired warning shots directly over the women's heads. The crowd flinched, but they did not scatter. This was the first major defiance of the Islamic Republic. The authorities expected a quick collapse. Instead, they faced a siege. The resistance in the streets of Tehran and Qom lasted for 6 straight days. The regime blinked. For a brief moment, the streets held the advantage. Pressure from the 6-day protest forced a sudden pivot from Khomeini's deputies. They announced a temporary suspension of the mandatory hijab rule. The government needed to neutralize the unrest. To the women in Tehran, it felt like a total victory. Why did the state retreat? It was a calculated maneuver. The pause served as a strategic breather to reorganize the security apparatus. By the middle of 1980, the authorities stopped pretending to listen. The enforcement returned with lethal precision. No more debates. No more attempts at persuasion. By mid-1980, the regime shifted its entire focus to systematic punishment. The street protests of 1980 faded. Silence replaced the shouting. But this was not peace. It was a strategic consolidation of power. By the end of 1979, the transition from chaos to calculation was complete. The mechanism of control shifted to the shadows. It relied on the eyes of neighbors. One report of a private gathering triggered a raid. One immoral gesture led to the lash. Revolutionary courts processed thousands of sentences with industrial speed. Political rivals faced execution or the cell. Women faced the whip. The regime institutionalized paranoia. Vigilantes stood on street corners. People looked over their shoulders before speaking. Mothers gave their daughters a single instruction: stay invisible. Social life became a sequence of risks and whispers. Amidst this atmosphere of curated fear, the Constitution of the Islamic Republic finalized the legal trap. Khomeini maintained his schedule of public appearances. The atmosphere of fear in late 1979 traces back to a single man descending a staircase. On February 1, 1979, Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Tehran. 14 years of exile ended with a single flight. He did not come to negotiate, he came to dismantle. The architect of the new order moved fast. Within months, the legal foundations of the previous decade vanished. Khomeini targeted the Family Protection Act first. He viewed modern age limits as a violation of Sharia law. Then came the numbers. The minimum marriage age for girls dropped from 18 to 9. 9 years old. A legal transition from childhood to matrimony by executive decree. The purge expanded into the state apparatus. Khomeini removed every female judge from the bench. He barred women from high political office. The new system codified a specific hierarchy. Public life became a male monopoly. The revolution promised dignity but delivered a total seizure of rights. Half the population lost their status as autonomous citizens. The legal reality of 1978 was the polar opposite of the coming decade. Before the descent into theocracy, Iranian women navigated a different world. Legislative corridors reflected this shift. Women in tailored suits walked the halls of parliament. They did not just vote, they drafted laws. They served as judges, doctors, and senior civil servants. The legal framework provided a shield that seems impossible by modern standards. Central to this was the family protection law. It functioned as a secular contract. It granted women the right to initiate divorce. It restricted polygamy. Most importantly, it set the legal marriage age at 18. The contrast was absolute. One year, a woman is a legal contemporary to her husband. The next, the state prepares to sanction the marriage of 9-year-old girls. In 1975, women held 22 seats in the Iranian parliament. Khomeini maintained the image of a restrained moral arbiter. He watched from above. Occasionally, he intervened to soften the optics. In 1980, a stoning case in Kerman province drew his attention. Khomeini reportedly instructed judges to halt such sentences. He issued a formal ban. No more executions by stones. The leader appeared to be a check on the system's brutality. But the restraint was a tactical maneuver. The suffering of women did not dictate policy. Floggings continued. Arrests for moral offenses never paused. Public punishments remained a daily reality on the streets of Tehran. The chaos of the revolution needed a permanent structure. By 1980 and 1981, the regime moved to codify the terror. The state replaced revolutionary improvisation with the Constitution of the Islamic Republic. It centered on the principle of velayat-e-faqih. This granted supreme authority to the Islamic jurist. The document turned religious ideology into the mandatory legal foundation for every Iranian citizen. It was the final victory of Sharia. By August 15, 1986, this foundation supported the weight of stones in the village of Kupaya. Case file number 1, Soraya Manucheri. She was 35 years old. The execution followed a technical protocol. Men dug a hole in the dry earth. They placed Soraya inside. They buried her body up to the waist. This was a functional requirement of the Sharia code. It immobilized the target. It ensured the process remained slow. Her husband provided the motive. He wanted a 13-year-old bride. Soraya was the obstacle. He accused her of adultery with a local widower. The village court operated under intimidation. No defense existed. The sentence was death by stoning. The crowd gathered. The first stone hit the white fabric of her burial shroud. A dull thud followed by a red stain. Then another. The physics of the execution required the stones to be large enough to cause injury, but small enough to prevent instant death. The process lasted until the body stopped moving. The world ignored Kupaya for decades. The details only surfaced later through the publication of the book and the subsequent film. The stoning of Soraya M. became the first documented evidence of the system's final result. The verdict for Soraya relied on specific articles of the Penal Code. The legal framework of the 1980s transformed morality into a matter of state security. The court could sentence a woman to 74 lashes for an uncovered head. This was the baseline. What was the price of a violation? Hundreds of lashes or death. The state revived severe Islamic punishments for sexual behavior. Article by article, the code categorized adultery and fornication as major offenses. One specific term became a universal weapon: fasad fil ars, corruption on earth, moral corruption. The term sounds abstract. The reality was a physical strike. Judges issued sentences for hundreds of lashes. During the early 1980s, thousands of men and women faced the whip. For women, the scrutiny was constant. Improper veiling led to flogging. Premarital sex led to imprisonment. In extreme cases, the state sanctioned stoning. A single accusation resulted in the loss of health or life. Applying these legal articles required a specialized conveyor belt of justice. The state needed speed. It created the revolutionary courts. These tribunals bypassed standard legal norms to ensure rapid results. Ayatollah Khomeini personally appointed the judges. One man held the mandate for the entire system. How fast was the process? A typical hearing lasted between 5 and 15 minutes. Defense attorneys did not exist in this vacuum. Investigation was a secondary concern. An accusation often served as its own proof. Judges relied on confessions extracted under duress. They followed the ideology of the supreme leader, not a penal code. The logic was simple: purification through pain. The courts processed former officials alongside ordinary citizens. High-profile executions made headlines, but the streets felt a different pressure. Neighbors watched neighbors. Families stood in silence as the whip fell in public squares. Humiliation became a collective experience. The physical wounds healed, but the memory of the scream remained. The assembly of the Sharia-based constitution changed everything. Religion was no longer a recommendation, it became the supreme law. Every criminal code and daily regulation followed one interpretation. Social expectations vanished. Legal requirements took their place. How did the state first test its power? It started with the bureaucracy. The machinery of control launched in July 1980. This was 2 months before the first missiles of the Iran-Iraq war fell. The government targeted its own employees first. A new directive hit every state office. Guards stood at the ministry gates. They watched the entrances. Any woman with uncovered hair faced a wall of uniforms. There were no fines, no written warnings. The guards simply blocked the path. The order was binary: comply or leave. Many were told to go home and stay there until they wore the hijab. For thousands of professional women, the choice was non-existent. Defiance meant immediate dismissal and an end to their careers. Every government doorway turned into a checkpoint against the threat of unemployment. 1 year after the ministerial purges, the control shifted from office desks to the asphalt. In 1981, the state expanded its reach. The hijab became mandatory in every public space: streets, buses, shops, parks. Black chadors emerged against the gray backdrop of Tehran's morning rush. A woman approached a city intersection. A guard stepped forward. He signaled for her to stop. He inspected the fabric, the hair, the ankles. A brief nod or a hand on a shoulder to pull her aside. The verdict was instant. The law transformed clothing into a permit for movement. Without the correct veil, a woman lost the right to walk her own city. In 1983, the state codified the violence. New criminal statutes replaced administrative threats with physical pain. The legal basis was ta'zir, discretionary punishment under Sharia law. It provided a specific technical standard for defiance. For an uncovered head, a court could now order 74 lashes. To enforce the law of 74 lashes, the state needed a dedicated machine. In the mid-1980s, that machine took a specific form. Who searched for the violators? Patrols in both civilian and service vehicles. The regime established the Guidance Patrol, officially known as Gasht-e-Irshad. They were not alone. Members of the Islamic Revolutionary Committees joined the hunt. Some wore standard uniforms. Many wore plain clothes. This ambiguity turned every bystander into a potential informant or officer. The structure relied on constant mobility. White and green police vans became the primary tool of the streets. The process followed a mechanical rhythm: identification, interrogation, seizure. Officers targeted sidewalks and marketplaces. They looked for bad hijab. A stray lock of hair or a short coat triggered an immediate stop. Guidance patrol members measured the length of clothing and the opacity of fabric. One technical violation was enough for a detention. Reports from the period describe women being slapped or beaten on the spot. If the violation required processing, the officers grabbed the target by the arms. They dragged her toward the open doors of a waiting van. The catch pole became the primary symbol of the hunt. It was a long metal rod ending in a heavy, spring-loaded collar. The design was simple. The mechanism was borrowed from animal control. An officer extended the pole, snapped the ring around a woman's neck, and pulled. The victim could not move. She could not breathe. Any struggle tightened the steel grip. Patrols deployed these tools in crowded hubs, mosques, markets, public squares. Resistance was impossible. If a scarf slipped 2 inches, the collar snapped shut. Officers then dragged the target toward the vans. They did not explain the charges. They did not need to. Women developed a specific survival psychology. They froze at red lights. They moved in slow, deliberate patterns. A sudden gesture could be interpreted as defiance. Punishment required a stage. The guidance patrol transformed public spaces into courtrooms. Shopkeepers lowered their metal shutters. Pedestrians stopped. The state turned flogging into a ritual of mass observation. The air in the marketplace changed. One specific sound dominated the silence. It was the sharp, rhythmic crack of leather hitting skin. The whip struck 74 times. The streets were not the only front in this war. The state moved the front line into the home. A husband was now legally responsible for his wife's appearance. If she stepped outside without a hijab, the police arrested him. The pressure shifted to the classroom. The regime dismantled the mixed-gender schools of the 1970s. Separation began in primary school. Young children learned their first lesson: the opposite sex is a source of sin. In universities, the purge was technical. Engineering and religious studies departments enforced the strictest dress codes. Women found themselves pushed out of the very fields meant to build the nation's future. Segregation reached the water. Public beaches and parks were divided by metal fences or closed to mixed groups entirely. Control was total. In remote provinces, where the central government's oversight was thin, the legal system regressed further. In 1986, the courts officially reinstated death by stoning. The legal code transformed the private sphere into a battlefield. It was no longer just about the veil. Every domestic choice became a potential felony. Was this limited to women? No. Article 190 of the revised code applied to everyone. Theft led to the surgical amputation of 4 fingers on the right hand. Repeated offenses meant losing the left foot. Consuming alcohol triggered 80 lashes and massive fines. The ultimate weapon was mohareba, waging war against God. It was a broad, lethal category. Conviction meant the death penalty. Public purity demanded total segregation. Morality patrols raided mixed-gender parties. They arrested girls for simply standing next to male friends. For women, the spectrum of punishment was wide. Public humiliation, flogging in damp prison cells, long-term incarceration. Khomeini hailed these laws as the purification of the soul. In reality, they were the systematic destruction of the family. The state saw modesty. Families saw terror. Parents made a desperate choice to protect their children from the street patrols. Mothers locked the doors and kept their daughters home from school. In June 1989, the architect of this system died. Ayatollah Khomeini was 86. He was old and seriously ill. 10 years had passed since the revolution. The streets, once filled with hope, now felt broken. What remained was a machine of surveillance. The Iran-Iraq War had already claimed 1 million lives. Political purges and executions had torn the social fabric apart. For women, existence was a daily calculation of risk. Black flags covered the country. Mourners filled the squares of Tehran. The visual was absolute. Millions of people in black, a sea of grief moving toward the Behesht-e cemetery. The wooden coffin moved through the crowds. Thousands reached out to touch the shroud. In the heat, the air smelled of dust and rosewater. Outside the cameras, in the privacy of their homes, many Iranians counted the cost of a decade. An entire generation had reached adulthood knowing only one reality. They were born into the revolution. They grew up under the morality police. They entered maturity with the shadow of the gallows over their personal lives. The death of the leader changed nothing for the patrols. The structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps remained intact. The legal codes stayed in force. The system survived its creator. 1,000 women. In the years following Khomeini's death, this was not a peak, it was the baseline. Analysts recorded thousands of arrests for bad hijab annually. The supreme leader was gone. The Revolutionary Guard and the morality police remained. Did the methods change? Thousands of police reports confirmed the opposite. The equipment was standard issue. Patrols used catch poles, long metal rods with loops, to snag women and drag them into vans. No dialogue, no warnings. One officer held the pole, 2 others pushed the suspect inside. The penal code prescribed 74 lashes for dress code violations. This was no longer a temporary revolutionary measure. In the 1990s, the state integrated these punishments into the judicial bureaucracy. It was a technical process: arrest, identification, sentencing, execution of the lashes. The 1980s campaigns stayed in the collective memory. Families performed a silent risk assessment every morning. Husbands checked the length of their wives' coats. Parents ordered daughters to keep their heads down. Fear dictated the urban map. Women memorized which intersections held permanent checkpoints. They calculated the distance to the nearest side street. Every exit from the house required choosing a safer route. The temporary measures of the 1980s did not vanish. They became the permanent background of Iranian life. The Islamic Republic integrated surveillance into the morning routine. Fear dictated the map. Women calculated the safety of every intersection before stepping outside. One wrong street meant a patrol. One patrol meant an arrest. This was the systematic construction of a culture of fear. It functioned through the erosion of private trust. When the state punishes a woman, the trauma radiates inward. It fractures families. It silences communities. Was this merely a legal shift? No, it was a psychological occupation. Later leaders softened specific edicts. International pressure occasionally halted a public whipping or delayed a hanging, but the infrastructure remained functional. The laws of the Khomeini era had already achieved their primary objective. They transformed the female body into a primary tool of political power. Obedience became a visible, public requirement. The architect of this system died in 1989. His successor maintained the patrols. The instructions for the morality police stayed in the manuals. For millions of women, the shadow of that decade never lifted. It follows them through the streets of Tehran today. The past walks exactly one step behind.